welcome to another episode of Bacon and Bezels. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite TV shows, which is Frasier. And this show just exudes sophistication and class, and it was a hilarious show. Not only was it sophisticated and Frasier was this very classy guy, but he could also laugh at himself and also didn't take himself too seriously. And that's what I really like about it, is that, even though it's about these two very uppity brothers, they also have a lot of love for each other and love for their family, and they don't take themselves too seriously. Everybody around them is trying to get them to understand that even though they're trying to live this high class lifestyle, that they're silly at the same time. So that's a little bit why I like Frasier. You can see these pops behind me. You might have seen them in past episodes. And today we're going to look at their watches, which exude the class and sophistication that they have in the show, I believe. Just some really cool watches and some very unique watches. Definitely some 90s watches, because that was the time they were in. Frasier has many different watches in the show, and I've watched it probably 3 or 4 times all the way through the show, and I still have not figured out every watch that he wears. He wears a lot of different watches, and it's very similar to Seinfeld. And the first watch that Frasier wore that we're going to talk about is the Breitling Super Ocean chronograph with the bullet bracelet. And Seinfeld actually wore that in the show as well, in his show as well. They kind of shared a couple different watches, and that was one of the very prevalent ones because Frasier wears it in a lot of different episodes. And they share a lot of different girlfriends as well. You can definitely tell it was going on at the same time, those two shows, because a lot of actresses were in that show. Daphne came over from Seinfeld. So it's kind of cool to watch that as kind of a little history guide. The Breitling that he wears is super cool. It's the chronograph, like I said, with the bullet bracelet, and it's just a very 90s watch, but it's still very nice today. And Breitling actually reissued a version of that watch with the bullet bracelet because it was so popular, and they still make those today. So that was, part of the show that I really liked. The next thing we're going to look at is Niles' watch collection. And Niles has a very simple watch collection. It's one watch, and it is the Patek Philippe Ellipse, and he wears it in every single episode of the show. I've watched every single episode, and there's not an episode that he does not wear this, as far as I could tell. And even, you could see in this picture, even when he's at his lowest point, when his wife has divorced him and he has to live in this crappy apartment, he's wearing a Hawaiian t-shirt that makes him look ridiculous. Even when he's in that state, he still has his Patek Philippe watch, and I just love that. And it's a Ellipse, like I said, which is a very unique, very specific Patek Philippe watch. Many even watch people don't know about that model. Obviously, when you think of Patek Philippe, that's not the first model that comes to your mind. And just the fact that he wears one watch, I've always admired that. I wish I could do that. I'm just not a one watch guy. But the champagne dial on his watch is very reminiscent of my Tudor here, and we're going to be looking at that a little later. And I think a lot of my watches have been influenced kind of by the watches that are on the show. And another time Patek Philippe shows up in the show is, again, concerning Niles and his divorce, and his ex-wife Maris tries to get him back by buying him a Patek Philippe pocket watch. And I love this scene. Frasier thinks it's for him, so he's opening it up, and just the excitement in his eye and the excitement with Niles, and they kind of talk about how it's, Patek Philippe and the box, and it's just a very awesome scene. So Patek Philippe and Cartier as well is another watch that Frasier wears, and it was gifted to him by the lawyer that he dates for a while. And there's a scene where she gives it to him, and he goes and shows it off to all the women at the party, and it's pretty funny. And as far as I can tell, that is a Cartier American or Americana. As you know, there's a couple different ways people say it, but it's on this very interesting beads of rice type bracelet, and very 90s, just like all his other watches. But the scene of of her gifting it to him is just a great scene, and that's the other thing I love about all these watches. I mean, there's kind of a scene or kind of a reference to all of them throughout the show, so that makes it even more special. And then the last watch we're going to look at is Roz Frazier's producer, and she wears, just like Niles, she wears a watch pretty much the entire show. I think there's a couple episodes early on where she's not wearing it, but pretty much from season, I'd say 3 or 4 on, all the way to season 11, she's wearing a white Rolex Air King, and I believe it's a 34 millimeter Air King. Just the fact that it's not like a dainty women's watch. It doesn't have any diamonds. It's just a straight up white face, simple Rolex Air King, and I love that watch. And it's featured prominently in many episodes. And this picture, you can see as she's laying down on the couch, and it's very shiny, and it has that oyster style bracelet. And as I'm going to show a watch later on that I love, which has the oyster style bracelet. So here are a few watches in my personal collection that kind of remind me of the watches that we've been discussing today. The first one is this Bulova pocket watch that my father-in-law gifted me a little while ago. And it is a gold pocket watch, just like the gold pocket watch, the Patek Philippe that was gifted to, Niles. Frasier thought it was for him, but it was for Niles. And this one, obviously, far less expensive, but I think it's very cool. It comes in this little, wooden box, kind of like the one that Frasier received, the Patek Philippe. So just a very cool little watch. Secondly, we have my Tudor Oyster Quartz, which I've featured in previous videos, and I just love this watch. And the champagne gold dial reminds me of Niles' Patek Philippe Ellipse, because it had that gold dial. And every episode of the show, you can tell he's wearing it because you can see that gold kind of flash from his cuff. And obviously, I've talked about this watch before, but I just love this Tudor and just how it looks like a Datejust, and one of my favorite watches. And lastly, we have my newest pickup, which I've done the last 2 videos on, but I still am in love with this thing. I'm still in the honeymoon phase months and months later with this Rangemaster, this Islander Rangemaster. And the oyster style bracelet, I've got to be careful not to say oyster because Rolex owns that, but oyster style bracelet, which is just awesome, very masculine looking. But this is very similar to the oyster bracelet on Roz's Air King. And even though I said masculine, when it's on a woman's wrist, I think it looks, fantastic, especially with Roz, because she's a very powerful woman in the show, very powerful character in the show. And for her to wear, kind of a masculine watch is very fitting of her character. So those are just some of the watches in my collection that remind me of the watches in Frasier. And, even though they're not as expensive, they have the same meaning to me. Thank you for watching this episode of Bacon and Bezels. I know it's been a while since I've made a video, but it was really fun to do a video that I'm really passionate about, and I hope you enjoyed it. I love reading your comments, so please keep those coming. I'm listening. And as always, cherish the time.